Good morning, gentlemen. This morning is the 37th segment, Think Before You Speak series. The laws of Shemirat Halashon with clarity. Lilu Nishmat the Hafetz Chaim Zechet Tzadik Lebracha. Lilu Nishmat Luza Liza Bat Henriette and her children that passed in the fire. Ruach Hashem Tenichena Megan Eden. These halachot should be a great zechut for a great Yeshua for Moshe ben Leah, and it should be a great source of Yeshuot and Hatzlacha for our Bnei Chabura and the Yeshuot of Klal Yisrael. These halachot also should be a great zechut for the Shemirat Elyona and the Yeshuot Gedolot and Hatzlacha of Chaim Davido ben Chayesara. Today's halachot titled the Apikores. Now, who is an Apikores? Halachically speaking, an Apikores is somebody who denies either the oral Torah or the written Torah. Even if he denies one halacha, even if he denies one pasuk in Torah, even if he denies one precept or one concept of Torah, the person is considered an Apikores. A person is allowed to regard someone as an Apikores only if you personally heard the words of heresy, the Apikorsut, directly from that person. Or maybe he's a known Apikores. He's firmly established in the community as an Apikores that's known. Then you're allowed to speak Lashon Hara about him. You're allowed to degrade him, both in front of him and not in front of him. However, you may not rely on hearsay when it comes to presuming that someone might be an Apikores because you heard from others that he said or he holds whatever it is. Hearsay does not allow you to presume someone's an Apikores, and you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara or degrade him just on hearsay. Though, with hearsay alone, you're allowed to be defensive, take defensive measures to protect yourself or others by privately warning other people it might be a good idea to stay away from this guy until it's clarified if he's an Apikores or not. I want to take you back in history for a moment and see how many times this halacha came into fruition. If you remember, right before World War II, there was the Haskalah movement. And this source of Apikorsut was spreading like wildfire all across Europe. And they were literally taking the Torah HaKdosha and trying to make it look like old-fashioned. And they were very much into the concept of you need to have modernization to be accepted by the world and to fit in. Their Apikorsut went so far that so many Jews were falling where they stopped keeping Shabbat, they stopped dressing like Jews, they stopped keeping kosher, they left the ways of Torah because they kind of nicknamed Torah as the old-fashioned ways, and they brought them to secular studies. At that time, the great rabbis of the generation, the Briskerov, Rabbi Avram Kamenovich, the great tzaddikim and rabbis of the generation, they went out with such strength, admonishing the Apikorsut, degrading openly the Apikorsim so that people will know to stay away from them. That is a perfect example of being allowed to degrade and speak about the Apikorsut when it comes to the hurting of the religious levels of Klal Yisrael. Many different countries, Jews came flocking to Israel right after Israel became a state. And at that time, the secular government set up transit camps where they would keep the new immigrants before they would place them in Israel. While they were all grouped together in these transit camps, the secular government of Israel at that time sent in their agents to try to modernize all the new immigrants, taking them away from Torah Judaism and putting them into secular schools, secular kibbutzim, in order to rob them of their religious observance. I know from many stories that I heard from the Moroccans that came over to Israel. I know many stories from guys that I went to yeshiva with, Temanim, that they came from Yemen, Yemenites, that the first thing they did when they came to Israel, they cut off their peot, and they told them, this is a new age, a new time. Drop the old-fashioned ways of Torah. Drop the old-fashioned ways of Shabbat. You need to go into a new European Israeli society. And at that time, many Gedolim instructed the activists that were working on behalf of Torah to break into these transit camps in the middle of the night and talk to the families and tell them, listen, don't listen to these people. They're robbing you from Torah. They're robbing you from Shabbat. Don't send your children to these secular schools. Insist that you're only going to send them to yeshivot. And they used to say, but what do you mean? They told us that they're teaching Torah in the schools that they're going to send our kids. No, they're lying to you. It's all a hoax to be able to rob you of Judaism. They were allowed to do that in order to save the lives of so many by pointing out the Apikores. People that are faced with those that are robbing Jews of their Judaism are considered Apikores, and we have to make a stand Leman Hashem. Thank you for listening.